Hey everyone, this is Michelle Sutherland. I'm the Director of Prevention Services here at the State Department of Education. I'm here with Kristen Ashley, who I'll have her introduce herself in a minute. And Shelly Ellis, our Executive Director of Counseling, is here as well. We are super excited that you're here with us today to do Building a Crisis Team. The very first thing I'm going to ask you to do is to please sign in. Even if you are watching this at your neighbor's computer, I need each person who's watching to sign in individually, because this is how I'm going to not only send you CEUs and your PD certificate, but this is also how you're going to get the first shot at signing up for our live in-person training that's going to be held in February for crisis team training. You all who are attending today are going to have first shot at that, and we will give you the rest of today to actually sign up for one of those events, which we'll talk more about toward the end of our session, but it is something that we really want you to do. I'm also going to type in these login for how you log in and sign in the comment section, so you can have that after we move on to the next slide. I can't multitask and type and talk at the same time. So there it is. There is the link if you just want to click on it in the chat section. You can chat with us by texting in the chat section on the right-hand side of your computer screen. We will see that in real time. So if you have a question in the middle of our presentation, please ask it, and we will do our best to answer your question as we see it. We're really glad that you're here with us, and we're about to get started. So before we do, I just want to say thanks for coming. So here we go. Again, that login is in your comment section of your chat box. So I am Michelle Sutherland. I have a master's degree in human relations and working on my hours of school to test for my LPC. I am a licensed school counselor, and I was a school counselor for 5 years in a middle school, and then I was an advocate last year at a large 6A high school. Before I did all of that stuff, I was a journalist. My bachelor's degree is in journalism, and I was also a mom and a wife. I did stay home with my boys for a little bit. We thought it was really important that we put our pictures on here so you would know who you're talking to. So here, that's who I am. How do I log in another participant on your computer? They can just watch it with you. You can just log in separately. It should hit another dialog box, or have them log in on their phone or their computer later.
Hi, and I'm Kristen Ashley. I do have my master's degree in marriage and family therapy. I'm currently an LMFT candidate, almost finished with my supervision hours. And I am a certified school counselor. I worked as an elementary counselor for 7 years in a couple different districts, and currently am working as Norman High School's student advocacy coordinator. And one of the main reasons that Ms. Michelle asked me to do this, I have a little bit of professional experience in crisis and crisis response. While working as an elementary counselor, I experienced a couple different crisis situations in a elementary setting and in more public schools. I was the counselor at Plaza Towers Elementary in 2012-2013 school year, and we had actually a couple different crises that year. Most people recognize it by the May 20th tornado and how we responded and recovered from that crisis. Also that year, we had a crisis of a loaded gun found on our campus. So when we talk about the different types of crisis, I have experience in a few of those. Now working at a high school, I also have experience in crisis in the high school and secondary setting.
Okay. So what is a crisis? And we look at this definition in the American Heritage Dictionary of a crucial or a decisive point or situation, which I think we can all agree that that would be a crisis. It's a difficult or unstable situation, and I think anytime we mention the word unstable in a school setting, it can bring us some anxiety. It could also be a sudden change in the course, maybe in a health situation, or it could be either an emotionally stressful event or traumatic change in a person's life. We see those a lot. Or a point in a story when a conflict reaches the highest tension and must be resolved.
So the crises that we experience most in schools, these are obviously not in any order. We just put them out at random. Suicide is one that we experience at all levels, unfortunately, in school, all the way from elementary up to high school. And then we have violence with sexual assault, weapons, and fights. A lot of the situations that don't necessarily shut down schools but happen and school continues to go on still is a crisis for those who are involved and those who are around it. Traumatic or sudden death of a student or faculty member. Obviously, natural disasters affect our school, and we've seen that quite a bit, not just at our state level, but also the national level. Substance abuse and overdose on campus or off campus is a crisis for those working the situation and working with students. Other traumatic events, they can be not necessarily in your school building, but a community crisis, something that your town is experiencing, and it will then reflect into your building and how you can handle that. Obviously, bomb threats and lockdown and intruder and then hostage situation. All of these situations are things that you hear about, you prepare for, and you plan for. Like we do our routines of our fire drills and our tornado drills and lockdowns and things like that. But today we're really going to talk about when it happens, how we respond, and how we manage all of those around us that are experiencing the crisis, directly and indirectly. So when we talk about our crisis team, we're talking about representatives from all areas of the school and then also immediate needs that the school or groups need during the crisis. This is going to be not necessarily just in your building, but how you can collaborate with your district, surrounding districts if you're a small school, and then also community services and making a whole team to prepare for the crisis in the future. Some of the areas that we are looking at for roles on the crisis team, obviously administrators, and that goes district level all the way down to site. That includes directors, superintendents, and also principals. Obviously counselors and teachers, people in the building need to be on your crisis team. Non-school staff members, community resources, clergy, any other type of professional that is trained in crisis management or just really people in general and how to navigate those situations. And then it's helpful and we very much encourage having alternatives because sometimes either a person is out when the crisis is going on, but also there's situations where the crisis might be too close to people and we can opt to use our alternatives. Specialists that sometimes districts may not have if you're a smaller district, but we do like to include this for all types of areas. Our school psychologist, we encourage if a person is trained in this or if they have maybe just a passion to help people with crisis in any of these areas, nurses, advocates, school resource officers, special ed teams, any of those people can be helpful. It's finding a good fit for the team and finding who really is passionate and motivated to help in these situations.
And just talking about the special education team, for example, I know that I've been in situations where a crisis has occurred because a student in special education has either run from campus or caused an issue where they're being aggressive towards staff or other students. And I think you would really want a member of that special education team on your team for situations like that specifically. So what role should be played on a crisis team? And it's interesting to think about identifying the roles, and in the several crisis situations I've been a part of, we haven't necessarily had defined roles, which leads to chaos at the time. It's really important to figure out who should be doing what ahead of time so you know exactly what your role is in a crisis. So there needs to be a team leader, and that could be one of many people. It could be a counselor or a principal, or it could be a district administrator, a media representative. Some of the larger districts have a media representative staff person in their district who would fill that role. Otherwise, it might be the superintendent or the principal or someone really specific who knows they are the only people to be talking to the media to control the information that is going out. There should be a faculty and staff lead. That person would be responsible for actually addressing issues within the faculty and staff, helping host the faculty and staff meeting in the middle of the crisis or while you're addressing it, and meeting any of those needs. Because we also know, even in a situation where it's just one student who's had maybe a sudden loss, you've lost a student or a staff member, there are some faculty and staff members who might need a cover or a sub that they might be impacted more directly. There should be someone looking over the students, specifically watching out for their needs, a parent lead or a liaison who is communicating with the parents, community lead, and then a grieving family lead, the person on your team who is going to be talking with the family and meeting with the family, relaying information back and forth. And that is really, really important, especially in the case of a sudden loss of a student, a traumatic death. What does the family want? You want people to know or not want people to know? That's a really, really important piece. You have that communication back and forth with families. What I wanted to share with you specifically is about identifying community resources. And I have to tell you how much I have learned this year in my role watching some districts, especially smaller districts, pull together as a community and pool the resources together. And I've learned a whole lot that I've actually been able to share with some larger districts about what they do, and I'm really happy to share that with you. One thing I want you to think about and really encourage you is those of you who are in smaller districts where there's just one or two counselors, I want to really encourage you to think about having a crisis team that partners with another district or other districts in your nearby area. And this is for a couple of reasons. There's just not enough people to respond in a crisis when you're the only counselor. And I talked to a counselor recently who was in that situation, and she was very overwhelmed because she wasn't sure what she should be doing or whose needs she should be meeting first. And so if you had other counselors from another district come in, maybe even another administrator, teachers come in and sub, maybe from a different district, it would be really wise to partner together with you smaller districts so you're on a crisis team together. Train together, have the same plan together, have each other's backs whenever there is a crisis, because we know that inevitably we all are going to experience some sort of crisis at our school district. It also shouldn't just be about a crisis. We should be collaborating all the time with other districts, sharing resources, best practices, anything like that. If you are not meeting regularly with some other smaller districts in your area, I would really encourage you to do that, even if it's a quarterly or semesterly meeting, just to collaborate with each other. So any crisis team, you should meet regularly. And if you have the same policy, that's awesome. If you don't, you should be familiar at least with the other district's policy. So one really great tactic that I've learned this year is working with faith-based agencies. And I know we might feel kind of like, I'm not really sure about that. What if they do something we don't want them to do? But I'm telling you that if you work ahead of time and train and plan with them ahead of time, those complications can mostly be avoided. So I would encourage you all to find if there's a ministerial alliance in your community, or if there's a group of pastors or youth pastors that you could meet with ahead of time to create a partnership with. Even some schools have MOUs with these people, the Memorandum of Understanding, where they are working together back and forth. What's really important is that these volunteers need to be trained ahead of time. And that training should come from you about how you want them to respond in a crisis. I know one district who had a crisis this year had a meeting with their Ministerial Alliance members ahead of time, talking about what they could do in case of a crisis. And then when they had a crisis, each member of the Ministerial Alliance, each church, for example, had an event a different night of the week, so kids had a safe place to go during the weeknights when they're not at school. And if you work together ahead of time and plan that ahead of time, Then the ministers also know what to look for if you're concerned about a student, who to contact in your district if there's a concern, the protocols and policies if you are concerned. And they're also following your district policy and guidelines and your best practices. You also tell them that in a crisis they should avoid prayer and witnessing to students and to explain to them why that is important. All volunteers who come to a school setting should always have a background check and be vetted ahead of time. Example I have of this situation is there was a traumatic death, a sudden death in a smaller district in Oklahoma this year. And I spoke with the superintendent of the district, and he was like, well, I've contacted some people that I know to come help, which he did, which was fine. But when school started on Monday, the event had happened over the weekend. School starts on Monday. There are 25 people in his lobby of his school ready to help, which is a great problem to have, but he didn't know all of them. He didn't know if they were legitimately licensed individuals. He didn't know if they were a sex offender. He didn't know if they would pass a background check, and he certainly didn't have time at that point to run one. So knowing those people ahead of time and having that plan in place is really, really important ahead of time for those reasons. So it's also important to work with your state agencies. I'm not sure if you know this, but the Department of Mental Health will always send counselors to your school site if you have a crisis or a traumatic event. That's something that they're always willing to do. And you can actually contact me to help facilitate that. The Department of Health is also a place that could help you. And something that we're doing now here at the State Department is Shelly Ellis and I will actually respond to a crisis in the event of a crisis, which you probably know. You were probably registered for this training before in October, which we had to cancel because Shelly and I did respond to a crisis in a district. Thank you for coming back the second time and joining us the second time. But all these agencies are available to work with you. I have seen Department of Mental Health counselors respond to schools, and the Department of Health do things. And also the Department of Mental Health will work with a community that's affected, not just the school. So there's a lot of services that are available to you through the state that are always available. And if you ever have questions about that or want to know if you can get help, all you have to do is contact us and we can point you in the right direction or hook you up with the right places. So working ahead of time with local agencies and individuals could be key. If you know in your community you have licensed counselors that would like to help in an event, that would be a really great thing to do, or maybe even a counseling agency that might be willing to help you, and vetting those agencies or individuals ahead of time, and training them like we talked about. So I have a question. Let me see what it is. Is there a place on the State Department of Education website where we can access contact information for these resources? You know, that's a great question. I don't know that I have that accessible yet, but I can put it there. And I am going to go to our website and show you our crisis kit before we end today. But that's a great question. I will put some contact information on there for you in the next day or so. Good question. Keep them coming. So where can I find a crisis plan? Well, I just kind of Googled crisis plans and was looking for one, and there are some from universities and schools that are online. But it's also important that you work with the Oklahoma School Security Institute, which actually is one of our partner agencies as well, who they can help you find and write a crisis plan. Who should write that crisis plan? It should be your crisis team. That should always include an administrator, a superintendent, a counselor, I believe. I know in the district that I used to work in, our law enforcement officers actually came and helped us write our crisis plan. And my guess is your district probably does have a crisis plan, but it may or may not be up to date. So writing a crisis plan, that's one thing that we're going to do in our day-long training is teach you how to do that. So that is something that you can find. I do have a question, how can we contact you? Our contact information will be at the end of this presentation, and it is also on our website. Okay. There's going to be, in this crisis team training that we're talking to you about, there's going to be some initial training that we're going to provide to you. It's actually going to be a day-long training. The morning it will actually be the live training, and the afternoon will be your work time for your district. But it's also really important that you don't just come to one training and that be it for you. There should be some team building. So when you're working together in a crisis, you know each other and you know how to work together. Also required by law is something called the Safe School Committee or Safe Schools Committee. It is something your district should be doing on a regular basis. If you're not doing this, or if you're not aware of your Safe School Committee, ask your principal or your superintendent, because it is a requirement by law that you have this. And that Safe School Committee, I'm going to suggest to you, should be made up of your crisis team. That committee looks at things that could be making your school unsafe, how to make your school more safe, and meeting together regularly to talk about any crises that have happened or that are a potential for your district is really, really important. You should also meet regularly and do some practice ones, some tabletop exercises of, well, what would we do in this situation? Who would do what? Let's walk through this, even if it's just an hour-long meeting that you sit down and walk through a potential crisis and walk through it just sitting together at the table and talk through how that would work would be really important.
So one of the most important things as you're preparing and building a crisis team is to have as much preparation before a crisis as possible. Just recently I watched the movie Sully. I don't know how many of you have, but I found it to be a pretty incredible movie because it brought to light the importance of preparing for a crisis. The pilot was very trained in crisis response and everything with his flying abilities, but one of the lines that really stuck with me was when he was kind of not on trial, but he was under investigation, and he said, you know, everything is unprecedented until it happens. And unfortunately, we learn so much about situations when they happen and as we reflect after they happen. So when you start to plan and you're working before a crisis happens and really preparing your team for it, know that there will be areas that you will tweak and change, but really having confidence in what you're prepared to do is extremely beneficial. So one of the things that is important is to acknowledge your bias. Maybe your perceived opinion about different tragedies or situations that can happen. Some of the questions you might need to ask yourself and then ask your team members as you continue to have these regular meetings and ongoing exercises. Have you or people around you experienced a recent loss that's making things a little more challenging for you? Or on the other side, that's really preparing you to help more? Is there a personal reason you want to avoid a specific crisis? And you can be honest with yourself and be honest with your team about that. If you know, a drug overdose in particular is one of those real difficult things for you because you've had a personal experience or even a professional experience with it, and that's one of the areas that you might want an alternative placement or team member to help you out, it's okay to be honest, and it's actually very beneficial for all those around you to be honest about that. And do you have triggers of which you need to be aware? Maybe you don't know of your triggers, but as a team, that team building and those regular meetings when you're talking through these different situations, what's going on for me? Am I being triggered by anything? You know, obviously, we all have personal experience that sometimes our colleagues are aware of and sometimes they're not. You know, with my personal and professional crisis with the tornado, people don't necessarily always know because I wasn't a public figure, but if you knew I worked at Plaza, you automatically know I have an experience. And I have that public awareness that was brought to the attention of my crisis, but maybe you had a different crisis previously that people aren't aware of. And so talking to a safe person and being aware of what your triggers are is going to be beneficial for not just you, but for those you work with. Identifying safe people to talk to. Working on a crisis team can be extremely exhausting, and it can be overwhelming, and it can take a lot out of you. And so just identifying those people that you need to talk to kind of give you a safe place to collect your thoughts, to regroup, and then also just to emotionally reflect and process things. Somebody who's not on the crisis team, because people on the crisis team are going to have their own experiences, and you're doing that on a regular basis. This might be somebody who's also maybe a counselor in another district or at another school that's not a part of the crisis team, but can be a resource to you. They need to be somebody who you trust and that you see others trust as well. And that can be helpful because they know that you're dealing with sensitive topics and difficult information. They need to be educated about what you do and how you respond to crisis. Somebody who really knows what it's like to be in the middle of something and to be able to get through it and then also respond to it again. They also need to be somebody you can really talk to, somebody you're comfortable. Just because they're regarded highly and everybody suggests that they're great to talk to, if it's not somebody you're comfortable talking to, it's not going to be beneficial to you. I got a question. I have a question. Let's look at the question.
Do you have information we could use in our safe school meetings? Many times students won't talk at all. That's a great point and a great question. I don't have any off the top of my head, but that is something that I will look into and update our website with that information.
So this quote came from a book, and I'm sure it's somewhere in the title's escaping me.
When Crisis Comes to School.
When Crisis Comes to School. And he uses this quote, "Unfortunately, crisis teams can receive negative reaction from certified and classified staff." And when you first hear this, you're like, why would anyone be negative? This is a helpful thing. This is something that we really appreciate. But he brings a perfect point here that too often the exposure that the staff sees about the crisis team is when emotions are extremely high. The tragedy has already happened. You are already in the midst of crisis, and people respond different in crisis, and they get emotional. And sometimes there is, if we can think about how we feel in the middle of a crisis, even if we're not directly involved, but we're on the outside, we have not necessarily judgments, but we have understanding of what things should be, and people may have a perception about people on the crisis team, maybe what they did, or maybe why they were selected and things like that. Just be aware of this. Talk about this with your crisis team, and just make it very public about who is on the crisis team and what the different roles are. That way people are prepared ahead of time to know who could be stepping in to help with what.
And that just leads right into our next slide. And you need to plan ahead of time with trainings for your staff and let them know all those things. So they may not realize what a crisis team does and what they can do and what they can't do. And so they might feel overwhelmed in an instance when it's a crisis, because that's a really normal way to feel. But if you're planning with them ahead of time at staff meetings, letting them know who's on the team, what the role of the crisis team is, and what to expect if a crisis occurs, that's really important. For example, if in your crisis plan, and if this is a great practice, if you do have a sudden loss of a student or faculty member, it's a great plan to have a prepared script that you share ahead of time with your teachers, and your teachers read it to the students to let them know of the loss. Really good best practice, right? Unfortunately, it can be overwhelming for your staff to know that, and they might question you. They might say something like, well, why don't you just announce it over the PA? Well, the answer to that question is, well, it's not a best practice. Imagine how you would feel if you heard about a loss over the PA system, right? But you don't really have time to answer that question and help them understand it in the middle of a crisis. They just need to do it, and it can be really frustrating for them if they don't understand the reason behind it. So having that ahead of time is really important. Also, providing them that written crisis plan and even going over it with them at a staff meeting, I think would be really helpful for you and really, really important. So should it be your building crisis team or your district crisis team in a crisis? That's a great question. And some of you are like, our building crisis team is our district crisis team because we're not a big district, which is awesome. That it could be the same thing. But some of you in larger districts maybe have both, a building team or a crisis team. How do I decide? I think you just have to look at each individual situation and determine how big of a situation it is. For example, if I have a student in my office who is having some suicidal ideation, that's probably not a district crisis team response. That's a building crisis team. That's me, maybe another counselor, an administrator. We're going to respond to that appropriately within our building. If it is a bigger event, like the loss of a student, or maybe a huge fight, or something that involves a lot of people, that's maybe when you want to call in your district crisis team. Should the alternate crisis team members be used? I can tell you for sure that I would need an alternate member if I were on a crisis team right now, because I've had a personal loss recently. And that's okay for me to say that and to know that ahead of time. And let somebody know, you know what, I need a break from being on the crisis team for a while. I'll let you know when I'm feeling better, but I'm gonna need a little bit of a break. Having a calling or texting tree should be always utilized in a crisis. So for example, if you need to have an emergency staff meeting, there needs to be some way of alerting your teachers to that, or alerting the crisis team members through call or text. And care stations in place. A care station is a safe place for students to go in the middle of a crisis. Especially after a teacher has read an announcement, maybe the loss of someone in a crisis, they need a safe place to go and be able to talk about how they're feeling, a safe place to grieve, and that should be in a common location with trained and vetted volunteers in this area.
Now talking about debriefing from a crisis, which is very critical. We say quickly because we mean quickly and also often. Debriefing from a crisis can look like talking at the end of that day. And I just attended a crisis training a couple weeks ago, and one of the recommendations was to have, obviously most of the time you have a faculty meeting at the beginning of the day if the crisis happened overnight or the day before, but also having an optional faculty meeting or whatever it is, if it's just affected a small department or whatever, but having an optional meeting at the end of the day to debrief and to see how faculty is doing, to see how teachers are doing, but then also to see what was the response of kids today. Can we get a pulse about the school? Because when you're in the crisis team, you need to know how the whole school is responding or the whole community is responding, just so you know how to continue to plan the next day and the day after. So you want to make sure that you're quickly responding to people, and a lot of that has to do with debriefing with your crisis team. You need to have a record of who you saw. So if you have your care station set up and you have extra counselors or community resources on staff or there to help you and your staff, you need to keep a record of what kids you saw or what faculty members you saw, because that needs to be recorded so that you can go back to in the next couple of days to follow up with these kids or to follow up with this staff member to know how they're doing and if there still needs to be intervention or if there needs to be community resources given out to them or referrals. Involving all school officials that are on the crisis team, but then also those outside of the crisis team, because it might be affecting their building as well. So let's say if it's a tragedy at the middle school, you need to be in communication and debriefing with the principal at maybe a sibling school to know what else has been going on there and how they're doing. But that debriefing part after the crisis, at the end of the day, the following days, is really important. And then also just continuing to remember the follow-up counseling that staff and kids might need. And then also your crisis team members. Suggesting that or encouraging those to seek community referrals is very important, because we know that in the midst of crisis, we are so aware of everybody's needs. And then a week later, 2 weeks later, we start to go back to what we consider the new normal, and we have to continue to be aware that people are still adjusting and responding and grieving.
So what I want to do now is show you our website. Some of you might be pros at our website, but just in case you're not, I want to show you the website. Okay. Okay, so if you go to our website and click on counseling or go to counseling, we have a lot of information, but I'm going to touch on two things real quick. One, we have a new tab that's training. We have a new whole training page that you can go to that it's going to have all of our webinars, including after this one. Probably tomorrow or the day after, we'll have this one up online. And it's going to talk about all of our webinars, all of our resources, handouts, And our crisis kit, which is right here at the bottom of this page, it's also on our prevention page. So we've actually just completed some new forms for you to use, and we're still in the process of updating a couple. But for example, if you have a student who is a suicidal student and you need some actual paperwork to keep track of this event and communicate with the parents, it is an actual form you can print off and use. We are grateful to Norman Public Schools for sharing their documents with us. They're great documents, great resources. So there's a lot of different forms right here on the training page, but also on the prevention page. This is also there that you can use. You can have safety plans. A third-party statement is something I love to use. If you've ever worked with law enforcement, they will frequently have you fill out a third-party statement, letting whomever know what you witnessed and observed and what you know. So anytime I've had a suicidal student, I've written a third-party statement so they know where they're going to get a mental health evaluation, exactly the facts of the issue. We have a child abuse reporting form. We have a child abuse investigation form. We have a safety plan. If you have a student who maybe has had a safety issue, a self-injury or suicidal ideation, this is a great form to use with them. There's just a lot of great resources. I'm not going to go through each one of them, but I wanted you to know that these forms do exist, and we're constantly updating and adding forms to our list. So if you have a great form or a great tool that you use in your district, please share it with me so I can share it with our community. So the accumulation of this training is something I'm really, really excited about. We have gotten the go-ahead to plan for you crisis team training. We're actually partnering with the Oklahoma School Security Institute, and it's for your crisis team to come to. We're doing some regional trainings, which I'll show you in just a second. It's totally free to you. It's going to run from 8:30 to 4:30 p.m. The dates are all in February. In the morning, you will actually have training by trained staff members. It'll be myself, Shelly Ellis, our alternative director, education director, Jennifer Wilkinson, and also the OSSI staff, Jennifer Newell. And we're going to help you all learn how to be a crisis team. We've just barely scraped the surface today. This is kind of a broad overview, so it'll be more in-depth training. Then you'll have lunch on your own, and afterwards you have the option of coming back together with your team and actually working on your plan. Going over, if there is a plan, going over it, updating it. If you don't have a plan, we'll be there to help you write it. It's going to be a great, I'm really excited about this training. So we're really excited to tell you that here are our locations and our dates. We'll be at the Great Plains Technology Center in Lawton on Tuesday, February 7th. We'll be at the Autry Technology Center in Enid on Wednesday, February 8th. We'll be at the Francis Tuttle Technology Center Reno campus in Oklahoma City on Thursday, February 9th. We'll be at the Kiamichi Technology Center in Durant on Monday, February 13th. And we'll be at the Tulsa Technology Center in Owasso on Valentine's Day, Tuesday, February 14th. We're so grateful to the technology centers for hosting us for free. I will tell you that because of the limitation of space, tickets to this event are limited. So there will be a waiting list, but hopefully everyone will be able to register. If for some reason we have a huge waiting list, we will investigate doing a second training in that location. So it's so important for you to sign in. This is what you need to do right now, is to go ahead and sign in. I'm going to, again, type the link to sign in if you haven't done it yet. This is how you will be able to register for that training. It'll also help you get your CEUs and also your PD points. And it will let me communicate with you on registering for this event. So now we would like to have any questions that you might have. What if the entire team can't go to training? We want you to bring as many members as you can. And will you show us how to get to those resources on the State Department website? Absolutely. I would love to do that. So just give me a second. So let's just go to the State Department website first, and then I'll show you. There's 3 ways to get there. So the State Department website is sde.ok.gov/SDE. So here you are. There are 3 ways to get to our website. The first way is to go up here and type in counseling, except you have to spell it right. You can type that in and click go, and it'll take you to our page. You can also go to services, go to educator effectiveness, click on there, and it'll give you our counseling and prevention page. So we'll click on counseling. And the other way to get there is to just type in the website directly. It's sde.ok.gov/SDE/counseling. So then you have a bajillion resources. And if you have never been to our website, I really encourage you to go there. It's been recently updated. We have a lot of new information. All of our newsletters are archived here. We have just a lot of stuff for you. And this training page is totally new that we've just updated. It will have all of our live training abilities, webinars, our archives, and other resources. So this is where, at the bottom of this page, we do have that training kit. If for some reason you can't go to that page, you can also always go to Prevention Education, and we'll have information there for you as well. Training kits and etc. And
let me change the screen just a little bit so you can see a little better.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay, so I have a question. Is it possible to set up a training in the far northwest, suggestions, Guymon or Woodward? Enid is kind of our northwest Oklahoma location as of right now. If we do have a lot of interest in those areas, we can certainly look into that. What other questions do you have?
I think Sheldon, they were asking about how to get in touch with us. If we have a crisis that occurs in the evening on the weekends, they just need to email us and put crisis
Okay.
as the title subject with that phone number where we can call them back since we get email from phone, but they need to email post at that.
Okay.
I can tell them that.
Okay. The February training available to sign up, I'm going to go back to my office when we finish here, and we will actually email you the links to sign up, and you'll have it today. Do you have information we could use in our Safe School meetings? Many times students won't talk at all, and yes, I don't have anything up on that right now, but I will have some information up on that. One of you just said you had a student barge in, which is the life of a counselor. And very interested in a Woodward location. So here I'm going to give you my contact information. My email address is in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. And something Shelly was just saying to me to tell you all is if you do have a crisis on nights or weekends, it is really important that you email Shelly and I both and put the title of crisis in the subject line and give us your phone number, and we will call you back. We do check our email frequently from our phones, but if you will go ahead and email us both, one of us will get back to you as soon as we check our email. So that's my email address. Hers is the same domain, and it's Shelly.Ellis, SHELLY.Ellis. I'm hearing lots of Woodwards. Here, I'll type in her email address too. Any other questions? Any other questions at all? Please fill out our course evaluation. It's very important for us to know if we've met your needs, how we can do better on this training in advance. Also, just want you to know this training will be online, archived for you, so you can watch the live presentation, especially if you'd like to share it with your administrator to show them, hey, this is what we really need. We really need a counseling crisis team plan, and you need to help us make sure that happens. I'm getting lots of Woodward, so we'll look into that. Woodward is a very popular place. Okay, any other questions? Any questions at all? You have our email addresses for Kristen and I both, and you do have Shelly's also. I put it in the chat notes. So if you don't have any other questions, you can always email me back. After I email you all, if you haven't logged in, please do so. I'll put that sign-in up one more time. I want to give a huge thank you to Kristen Ashley, who drove like a crazy person up here to get here on time from another meeting. So thank you so much, Kristen, for your expertise and experience. And thank you all for tuning in on this chat. We're really, really glad that you did. I hope you guys have a fantastic day, and I will see you later.